Welcome to the Chamber Connection. I'm Mary Hodson, President of the Chamber of Commerce here in Hutchinson, Minnesota. I am so glad to be back with you for another episode so we can talk about something that's really important. I don't know about you, but I have heard so much information about the COVID-19 vaccine that I'm confused. I don't know who to trust and I don't know what to believe. So, what do you do when you're not sure? I call the experts, and I called my friend and a very smart human, Mr. Brian Pollmann. Doctor, you're a DO, not an MD.
Correct.
Which means you're even smarter.
I don't know about that, but I'll go with that.
Lots of people ask what DO is.
Yes.
Can you explain that?
Absolutely.
Let's just get that out of the way.
It stands for Doctor of Osteopathy. In the United States, there are two types of medical schools that graduate physicians. One is an MD that most people are familiar with. The other is a Doctor of Osteopathy. The short answer to what's the difference between the two is we all get the same training when it comes to treatment and diagnosis of disease. The slight difference is there's a little bit more of a holistic approach with a DO, and we also receive additional training in some spinal manipulation. So some DOs do manipulation in the clinic, some don't. It just depends. But DOs encompass all different specialties throughout the United States. They're licensed in all 50 states. They perform surgery, they do hospital work, and everything in between.
So I have a young friend who is in the middle of getting her DO training out on the East Coast, and someone said, a DO, so you're not going to be a real doctor? And so she had to explain, and sometimes that's really confusing for people.
Absolutely.
So you have held lots of different positions at the hospital and the clinic. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now?
Sure. So my current position is I'm the Chief Medical Officer of the hospital and the Hutchinson Health System. I've been in that position since 2013. I oversee all of the policy that pertains to the delivery of medical care, both in the clinics and the inpatient units at the hospital. I work very closely with my other partners in the facility, both the Chief Nursing Officer, the President of the hospital, and numerous other staff members and medical directors to perform that. I also am the chair of the Inpatient Medicine Committee or department. I've been doing that for probably the last 5 years. I'm also the lead hospitalist, so I take care of all the physicians who do all of our inpatient care at the hospital as well. So I do many things.
Do you do laundry and cook too?
Yeah, I actually do, but I try not to do it every day.
Oh my gosh. So I knew that you had a couple of these, but holy buckets. So I told you, he was smart. He's smart. Okay, so I'm just going to be really upfront with everybody. I used to work at the hospital. I have a number of friends who have raved about your explanation to hospital staff about the vaccine. And so as soon as I heard that, I called you and I said, Brian, can you do this for us and help the whole community have a real understanding? And I know you well enough to know that we're going to talk in some simple terms.
Absolutely.
We might even define some terms for people because there's words that many of us have never heard before.
Right.
So we'll go through that. So how do you start by telling somebody about the vaccine?
So I usually start with talking about what a vaccine is for in the first place and how a vaccine in general works. A vaccine's primary purpose is to get the body to become immune to a disease without causing that disease and doing it in a very safe way. So the easier explanation is we're tricking our bodies into thinking that they're getting infected with something when they're really not.
Okay.
Most people have received a vaccine in their life of some type. You know, there are several different types. People get them when they're children, they get them when they're adults. A lot of people are familiar with getting the flu vaccine every year, the tetanus vaccine every 10 years. There are different ways that they work, but in essence, they're doing the same thing. They're exposing the body to something that you don't want it to be there, that's part of an infection of some kind, whether that's influenza, whether that's hepatitis B, in this case, COVID-19. And then your body reacts to that, developing antibodies and immunity to that so that if you are exposed to the real thing, either, hopefully, you don't get it at all, or if you do get it, it's a very, very mild illness. It's not a severe illness.
Okay. So I'm thinking of my smallpox. Yes, I'm old enough to have had the smallpox, but I was born in California, so that kind of makes a difference. We're talking about polio,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
We still do the polio vaccine,
Yep.
and like polio's practically eradicated, right? I have a friend who is a nurse on the East Coast, and she talked about the fact that 1 to 3% of people actually were, I think of my grandfather. He always had a limp because it affected his leg when he had polio, right?
Yeah.
Or potentially maybe somebody died from it, but it was like 1 to 3%. But we still do the polio vaccine.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So it works for a purpose. And although there are millions of people who don't get it, we're trying to protect those few people.
Right, right. And so there's a couple things you're looking at when you get a vaccine. One is the personal protection that it provides you. That, hey, I don't want to have this. I don't want polio. I don't want COVID. So I'm going to get this vaccine in order to protect myself. But unfortunately, no vaccine, even the really, really good ones, which COVID-19 vaccine is one of those really good ones, only gives that immunity to about 95% of the people who've gotten it. So there's still 5 people out of 100 who could still potentially get COVID or one of these other illnesses, depending on the vaccine. And so what we try to do is immunize a population, and that creates, people may have heard this term called herd immunity. And what that means is that if you have so many people within a population who have been vaccinated, the ones who are vaccinated can protect the ones that are not, because the disease can't get a foothold within that population to spread to everybody else who hasn't developed that immunity from the vaccine. And so to give you a real world example of what this is like. So with the COVID-19 vaccine, we all know that it primarily affects, for severe disease, those that are older, 65 and older.
And like you said, primarily.
Yes.
It's a generalized
Correct.
statement, right? Because I know there's going to be people going, yeah, but.
Right, correct.
But in general.
Yes.
Okay.
In general, it's for, if you look at the ages at which most of the severe disease it's in the 65 plus. But my own personal experience, not from me having it, but from me taking care of patients in the hospital, I'm 47. I've taken care of folks younger than me that I've had to admit into the hospital and ship to other hospitals because we placed them on ventilators. So it happens. There was a story in the Hutchinson Leader a couple weeks back about one of the children in our community had to go to Children's Hospital in the cities because they developed one of the rare childhood variants of COVID-19. So it's something that, yes, it absolutely can affect all ages. But when we're talking about the 65 plus, in this time we're starting to vaccinate right now, if we can get 70% of those who are 65 and older vaccinated, we will be able to reduce the amount of hospitalizations and deaths by 90%. So it just shows that even if we're getting a little over 2/3 of that population vaccinated, we're going to have a very real world effect on everybody, not just the ones who are becoming vaccinated.
There is something so innately uplifting watching you and your colleagues post pictures of your vaccinations.
Yeah, I certainly did it. Absolutely.
Heck
Great.
yeah. I was like
great.
cheering, like it's here, we've got it,
Yep.
and people are using it. Now, this vaccine works differently or is different than other vaccines that we've known.
Yeah.
Can you explain how
absolutely.
that?
So the way a vaccine works is it exposes the body to something. In the case of the tetanus vaccine, you're giving a little bit of the toxin that causes tetanus, and your body reacts to that, developing immunity to that. In the case of like influenza or other vaccines, we're giving either a killed or a weakened version of that particular vaccine. Polio is an example. There were 2 versions of the polio vaccine. The one we're using now uses a killed version of the virus that gets exposed to the patient's immune system.
Okay, but so it's dead.
Yeah, so one of the basic fundamental principles is to try to convey this immunity without causing the disease.
Okay.
So these vaccines, some of the older vaccines that we don't use anymore had a very, very, very small risk of developing that particular illness. The vaccines that we use now, especially the COVID-19 vaccine, in no way is able to infect the person with that illness. And in the case of the COVID-19 vaccine, we're only exposing them to a small piece of the virus, not the entire virus. So it's missing the majority of the virus that would need to be there in order to create the disease to begin with.
So this does have a piece. I mean, I'm thinking about genetics, and I'm thinking about those things.
Yep. So this
Use
gets,
the words that are going to make sense instead of me bumbling through. They're used to that.
So this gets back to your earlier question about how is this vaccine different. This vaccine is what they call a messenger RNA vaccine. Messenger RNA is so let me back up. Our body has genes in every cell of our body, and those genes are responsible for the way our body works, the way we look, the way everything happens within us. And the way they do that is the genes are basically like a plan, a template, a blueprint of all of the processes that our body uses.
Okay.
And the way that blueprint changes into the actual structure is through a few steps. And the first step that has to happen is that blueprint is a copy is made. And the way that copy is made is using this messenger RNA stuff. It's a chemical that's very similar to DNA or the stuff that our genes are made of, but it's just a little bit different. And that copy then gets to a different part of the cell, and then that copy is used in a different portion to turn into proteins. And proteins are things not just that we eat, but are what we're made of. Those proteins provide structure. Those proteins provide the ability to create energy, the ability to regulate our body's processes, digestion, our nerves, everything. And that's the short and long of how that works. So the way this vaccine operates is it injects a small portion of this mRNA, this copy of a gene, but it's not our gene, it's a copy of the virus's gene. And what that copy produces is it produces what's people may have heard of is called the spike protein. The spike protein is something that was determined to be the specific target for this virus, for vaccine, back when it was first discovered just over a year ago. And in fact, today is the anniversary of when we had the first case of COVID-19 officially diagnosed in the United States.
Wow.
It was a year ago today. So that spike protein, it's the absolute required thing for that virus to attach to a portion of our body in order to invade that cell and then create more virus. So if we are able to block that spike protein, think of it like a key in a lock. If we're able to block that key, it's not going to be able to open the lock of our body and infect us. And so the way this vaccine works is we're giving that small copy of that spike protein gene, we're inserting it into our own cells or in our own body. Our body then produces that spike protein because it doesn't know any different. And then our immune system reacts to it. And so that's the main difference. It's something it's not a new technology either. It's something that's been around since 1990. We just haven't had a vaccine yet because it's taken them 30 years to iron out all the kinks with using this. But it's been under intense research for the prevention of illness, and they're also looking at it for the prevention of things like cancers or treatment of cancers. It's amazing. It's an amazing technology. But as I said, it's 30 years old.
Quick, hurry up.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So this is really helpful, and I really appreciate the words that you're using because it helps me understand. I'm very visual, so I can imagine a key going in, and that helps me a lot. So what would you say are the most common questions or concerns that people bring to you about the vaccine?
Yeah. There's a lot of questions. I think the biggest one I hear a lot is a general feeling like it's been rushed. It's something that, we just discovered it in the U.S. a year ago, and yet we have a vaccine for it now. The previous record holder for a vaccine from initial candidate development to approval was 4 years, and we've done it in less than 12 months. So how is that possible? That's a long and complicated answer, but the short, to give you some very specific examples, is usually developing a candidate vaccine can take a couple years. And by a candidate, I mean something they're even willing or ready to test in a lab, not even on people yet. The reason this was so quick was, in that step, was number one, there was a worldwide effort to figure out this virus. And we had some experience behind it. This is very closely related virus to the SARS epidemic in 2002, that was in China, and then the MERS epidemic back in 2012, 2013 in the Middle East, and also South Korea. Very similar viruses, so people had some experience with them already.
Okay.
But when the new virus was identified, it took them a month to decode all of the genes, the 29 genes that the virus is made of, which is fantastic. So people have heard of gene editing, CRISPR, and all these other kinds of things. It's very much in line with the speed of that.
Plus, we're smarter, right?
Absolutely.
As we go,
Yes.
technology makes us smart.
And it's quicker.
Right?
And it's quicker.
Yep.
So after this, the genetic map of this virus was published just over a year ago. I think it was January 10th last year. Moderna, who is one of the main vaccine manufacturers, there's Pfizer and Moderna, who both have this messenger RNA vaccine. They had already been doing this research for the last 30 years. They already had a laboratory set up to create candidate vaccines. It took them 2 days to come up with a candidate vaccine after that genome was released. So again, we went from 1 to 2 years just to develop a candidate down to 2 days. And
Right.
that's just amazing. Next steps in line, usually there's some lab testing that's involved before you get to human trials. Once you're starting to look at what's called a phase 1 trial, that involves a very small amount of people just to look at basic efficacy and safety. Usually you're talking 75 to 100 people.
Okay,
Yep.
there's one of those words
Yep.
that I don't think I had ever heard before.
Sure.
Efficacy,
Efficacy, sure.
which is the effectiveness.
Right, how good it is, how well is it able to prevent
Okay.
the illness it's
Thank
trying
you.
to do.
Because I think that that's one of the things that
Yes.
we're here for.
Absolutely,
Yep. Okay.
absolutely. So that phase 1 trial, even to get approval to move into phase 1 trials, these very limited initial trials, on a normal, that's something that's approved by the Federal Drug Administration, the FDA. And that process normally takes 9 to 12 months just to apply and get approval to start. In an emergency, it can shorten down to 6 months. For this particular...
In a pandemic.
They were able to cut through all the red tape and got it done in 3 weeks. So again, it was very much moving along very efficiently because we were cutting through bureaucracy. We were relying on all of the collective efforts of scientists around the world. We were relying on all of the technology we've been developing for the last 30 years. And that's what was able to get this into those bigger trials, what we call phase 2 and phase 3 trials, which involve 30 to 40,000 people.
Okay.
And then once we got to that, which was last summer in July, usually those trials need to go on long enough to have enough people so that we can tell if it's really effective or not. And normally when you have a new vaccine, there aren't lots of volunteers floating around to try to get that. In a pandemic, that's right, when you're in a pandemic, that's absolutely what happened. They were able to close enrollment, which means people signing up for the trial, within days of opening them up last summer. So it was very, very quick. And the other thing that made this happen so quickly is once they have enrollment, they need to watch these folks and get to a point at which a minimum number of those folks have developed the illness just because, right? Just because they're out in the communities and doing their day-to-day. They take half of the group and give them the real vaccine. They take the other half, give them a placebo, which means like nothing. It just, they think they're getting something, but they really aren't. And then you compare those two groups to determine, okay, did the vaccine really do better than the group that didn't get the vaccine? And so because you have to wait till you get to a minimum number of infections or illnesses, the surge that we had in the fall actually helped speed this up because more people in the more people in the non-vaccine group got ill quicker.
Sure.
You know, more of them got ill faster, and that was able to accelerate the whole process again. So at the end of the day, when they received their emergency use authorization from the Federal Drug Administration in December, that was the final step for them to be able to give it to people. that we had gone through all of the same steps that we have done for any other medication or vaccine that we had done before. So while it was done profoundly efficiently, it was not rushed.
Okay. That makes so much more sense. And I am, my husband served in the military, right? I consider myself a patriot of our country. I'm very proud of our country.
Yeah.
But as you're talking about this, I got goosebumps thinking about people who were moving so quickly to try to help literally save the
Absolutely.
world, right?
Absolutely.
And that we could, in an emergency, get what we know to be a federal bureaucratic red tape piece that everybody was working together to make this happen.
Right. This was an absolute miracle of our time. I've been comparing it to others as I'm saying this is the moonshot of our era.
Okay.
It's not as glamorous and glitzy as seeing somebody walk on the moon, but it's something that we'll never see this level of efficiency and same directionness. You know, when all paddlers are paddling the same direction, the boat's going to go fast, and that's exactly what happened here.
Hallelujah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now there are 2 shots. So are they, you get 1 shot and then you wait either 3 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on which one, and then you get a second one.
Right.
Are they different or are they the same?
They're the same shots, and the reason why is you want to keep building that immunity.
Okay.
So the first shot, after you receive the first shot, they found that about 50% of people would develop immunity to the illness. After the second shot, that number went up to 95%.
Okay.
And so for most other vaccine series that we receive, things like hepatitis B, HPV, measles, all of those, mumps, rubella, all that stuff, generally those are a series of injections. It's not just one. Or in the case of like tetanus, occasionally we need to get a booster and all of that kind of thing in order to keep those immunity levels high.
So if we're thinking about the ones with the kiddos, they have certain months that they do them, and then they get the booster, and then they get the 12-year shots.
Right.
12-year shots were not cool.
Yeah.
So now there are people who are like, oh, you get sick, you don't.
Yep.
Same with COVID, right? There's people who are reacting differently to a positive than other people.
Correct.
And it seems the same with the shots.
Correct.
Let's just talk about some of that.
So you're getting to the safety of the vaccine. The vaccine is very safe. The long and the short at the end of the day is there have been no serious illnesses from the vaccine that have come to light. There have been some allergic reactions, which I'll get to in a second.
Okay.
But there have certainly not been any deaths or hospitalizations or anything like that. Compare that to the chance you take with getting the illness itself, right? As we said before, those who are older than 65 have a higher chance of a severe illness, but that doesn't mean that those who are younger than 65 can't or won't get it. And right now, there's no way to know whether or not you or I or anybody else is going to have that severe illness from COVID.
Right.
And so the reactions that we've seen for both the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, the most common one is arm soreness. I experienced this. Everyone I've had has gotten this one. About 80% of people will have a sore arm from getting the vaccine.
I get the flu shot.
Yep.
And my arm is sore. Or if I get a tetanus shot, my arm is sore.
Yeah.
So not any different than any other injection that I typically would get.
Correct. I would even say it's better than the tetanus shot. That one's notorious for making a sore arm for a few days. But this one, most people I've talked to, it's usually a day or two, and the soreness is really at the injection site, and it's not the entire arm. So that's about 80% of folks. About half of everyone who gets it might develop a little bit of fatigue. About 30 to 40% might get some chills, and then around 20% may have a low-grade fever. And those things are generally self-limited, meaning that they'll only be there for 2-3 days. In rarer cases, it may be a few days. But the overall, if you view any of these as, look at them as like a severe reaction, looking at like severe chills, severe fatigue, very high fever, all of that type of thing. Less than 1% of people who received the vaccine in the phase 3 trials developed a severe form of one of those adverse reactions. So it's very well tolerated.
And then now the second shot may be a little bit different.
Second shot, usually what you had the first time is going to be a little bit worse than on the second shot than the first time. So I haven't, again, this is anecdotal, meaning,
Yep.
just stories I've heard. I haven't heard much about people having one reaction in the first one and then completely different reactions in the second. Usually they're somewhat related. The other thing as far as allergic reactions, I was going to bring up, so severe allergic reactions are what we call anaphylaxis, the ones that people have, closing up the throat, or their blood pressure falls or something like that. The ones that you hear about when people have severe allergies to bee stings, and they have to bring an EpiPen with them and all of that type of thing. To date, there's been approximately 20 to 25 in the whole United States since vaccines started, or this vaccination has begun. So it's very uncommon. And none of those have required hospitalizations or have resulted in deaths or anything like that. Okay. Right now, the current guidance that we're receiving from the CDC, the Center for Disease Control that's kind of overseeing all of this, is that everyone who receives a vaccine just is observed for 15 minutes after that vaccine, because that's the time at which that severe allergic reaction is going to occur. And again, thankfully, it's been very minor.
So as we wrap up, we know that as of right now, we're recording this on the 21st, but you might be looking at watching this another time. The new guidance is 65 and older can get the shot.
So there's phase 1A, 1B, and 1C.
Yeah.
Phase 1A was mainly the healthcare workers. That's wrapping up right now. Phase 1B in the state of Minnesota is those 75 or older plus essential workers such as teachers and folks who work in stores and such. And then 1C is going to be 65 and older or other patients with high-risk conditions. Okay. So it should be phasing in. The main issue right now is vaccine supply. Okay. And so as soon as that improves, you'll start to see more and more of that deploy.
So do you have any idea when little old me or anybody else in the general public would be able to get the vaccine?
My guess is probably late spring, early summer.
Okay.
They're saying to get through the 1B and 1C group is probably going to be around 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
For coming and explaining to me and for our audience how this works. I've heard, and I'm sure you've heard, lots of great stories about what this really is, but this is about safety. This is about saving human life.
Absolutely.
And I really appreciate your time, because I know that obviously you're so busy, but this is such a great way to get the message out.
Yeah, and I would encourage people too, if you have questions, please talk to your physician. They can walk you through all of this if it's right for you. And that includes women who are pregnant, who are thinking of becoming pregnant, everybody. Talk to your physician about it if you have questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So if you have questions, call your primary doctor, talk to them, talk to the nurse, get the information that you need for your own situation. And thank you for joining us. I can't wait to see you again on the next Chamber Connection.